welcome to our second episode of the Flourishing podcast. Again, we are here in Gippsland in Mel's beautiful temple. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gurnai, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Lovely.
Excellent. All right, let's get stuck in for this episode. So
Right.
just begin with, just wondering if there's any news for the week in the world of neuroscience, positive psychology, anything that's happening that's new in the last little while that we can have a bit of a chat about?
Yeah, well, there's been a couple of interesting, I guess, if you like, posts or tweets that have come out from people in the particular world of positive psychology research and neuroscience. There's quite a bit of debate about the, if you like, the robustness of the methodology used in a lot of the neuroscience studies. So neuroscience tells us lots of amazing things about our brain, but the reality is we actually know very, very little about how it works. And so some of the big claims that are made that we say, oh, neuroscience, we've seen in our imaging or we've done this particular test and it shows us that this happens and that happens. Yep. There's been a bit of a rise in the debate around methodology. So any results that are derived from any particular experiment, regardless of what kind of science you're talking about, rely very much on the method that's used and the sort of analysis that's used to then analyse the data that's derived from the method.
Okay.
And the robustness of the outcome, if you like, how much confidence you can actually have in that particular outcome, is influenced quite significantly by, in particular, those two elements, not alone, but those two. And in the world of neuroscience, because it's so new and because we actually really don't have a very robust foundation of understanding of the brain, because we only know so little, big claims are made, which tend to be made based on maybe questionable methodology or limited analysis.
Yep.
So there's been a little bit of discussion about that. So I guess the way that I approach, there's a couple of things. One is a guy called B. Alan Wallace, one of my heroes in the mindfulness space in particular. He says that science should never insult your intelligence, right? Which I think is brilliant because, you know, we either just take the science without question, and even though the science doesn't make sense and we think that sounds a bit dodgy, but it's science, so therefore it must be true. It's almost like we take our intelligence out and put it to the side. So science should never insult your intelligence, and I just love that. I think that's a really great one. So making sure that we don't just accept an outcome, that we actually look at it and say, okay, well, how did they get that outcome? And is what they used a methodology enough that I would back or that I would feel confident enough using going forward? What questions aren't answered?
Yep.
What questions is it actually raised rather than answered? Is what they're doing similar to what I'm wanting to do? And if what they've done, where they've done it, is a completely different context and environment than what I'm thinking of, I can't just pick it up and translate it. So it's a bit of a cautionary note because the neuroscience part of things is becoming quite attractive.
Yep.
And from a kind of money-making industry perspective, as soon as we hear the word neuroscience, it kind of comes with some weight.
Yep.
So just a cautionary note about reading research papers very carefully. Please read more than the abstract. Don't just, start with the executive summary and go, oh my God, I know all about it. So I think it's just a timely reminder, again, that, it's such a new emerging area that we just need to just tread with caution.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting what you're talking about with the with the mapping. Is that what you said? There was some science at the moment around with neuroscience around mapping.
Yes.
Right, mapping the brain.
Yep.
Yeah. So I read this is a little while ago. There's a blog called Wait But Why, and this I cannot remember the name. Forgive me, I can't remember the name of the author of the blog, but he writes a really long form content, it's really interesting, really fascinating, and a lot of the time he's done a lot of stuff on Elon Musk, who's a very polarizing figure, obviously in the world, and Elon Musk has a particular arm of one of his businesses where they're trying to create a BMI, which is a brain machine interface, and it's pretty much a computer that can interface with your brain, and so what they're trying to do at the moment is actually map the brain. And they were talking, to begin this article, he was talking about the fact that from a very broad, big kind of macro level, we understand what the brain does,
Yep.
how it works, and then
Absolutely.
from a very micro level, we understand how it works as well in terms of neurons.
This fires here
that
and
fires
that
here,
fires
that
there.
fires
Yes.
there. But then everything in the middle, we've got
Not a clue.
we've got no idea about, and
Not a
there's
clue.
like this massive gap in our knowledge. And the brain is so complex, and like it's so insane that they're trying to undertake this mapping of the brain, which just seems so like daunting to me.
Well, it's daunting, but there's a couple of really, if you like, fundamental, almost philosophical questions that remain unanswered, which is almost the biggest barrier for humans to get past in order to really fundamentally understand the brain.
Yeah.
At the moment, our method of inquiry is matter. So in order to map the brain, what we're really doing is we're mapping what they call neural correlates, right? Which means the neuron fired.
Yep.
So all you're really mapping is the firing of a neuron.
Mm-hmm.
What you have absolutely no idea is, why did the neuron fire the way that it fired?
Yep.
The intent, consciousness itself, we can't measure at the moment, because unless we believe that consciousness is a thing we can point to, that's the only type of measurement that we currently have.
Yeah.
Right? Which means if ultimately consciousness isn't made of matter, we ain't never going to find it.
Yeah.
Unless we decide to change our methodology.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a big question.
I mean, it makes sense, but it's like
Oh, well, where do you start?
blows my brain. And
Absolutely.
Like, yeah.
Right? So that's one of the biggest challenges we've got. Okay. So yes, we can map the output, we can map the process, what represents the process, but what we can't map is the stuff that we can't point to.
Yeah.
And that's the trick. And I actually read something recently myself where the guy said, all this concern about AI, artificial intelligence, and are we actually going to be able to replace humans?
Yeah.
He said, we don't have anything that even remotely has the intent of a slug right now.
Yeah.
So anyone who's concerned, and when you read things about, we've worked out that we've created something that can produce empathy, not even close.
Yeah.
It's absolute la-la land stuff at the moment. We're so far away from it.
Well, it's funny you say that, because Elon Musk is actually very adverse to AI. He thinks that, from some of the stuff that I've seen him talk about, he thinks that AI, like if we keep going down the path we're going down, that AI is going to wipe humanity out, and that, but
apparently not even the intent of a slug yet.
Okay.
So it's a long way to go.
Yeah.
A long way to go. And I think that's what has to be, when I'm putting it back into the framework of the science of human flourishing, neuroscience is providing us with some, if you like, some really great references as to potentially why certain things we know work, we already know work. We're starting to now understand some of the mechanics from a brain perspective behind some of those things, which is very cool, because that then helps us say, okay, so now that we understand, how can we then potentially strengthen that experience? How can we potentially replicate it more frequently?
Yep.
So that's the benefit. But if there's practitioners out there claiming that they know what the brain does, we need to be pretty cautious about that.
Yeah, okay. Definitely. Cool. All right. Well, that's a nice little wrap up for this episode. So what we're going to talk about today is attention and awareness, which is the first domain in the DPF5, or the landscape for flourishing, which we gave a bit of an introduction to in our last episode.
Yep.
So I just want to talk about that particular domain in a bit more detail. So
for sure. So the 5 domains, one of the key things about the domains is that all of them interact together. There's no such thing as an element of our optimal functioning that operates in isolation.
Yep.
And so that's another challenge that we have as practitioners in the science, is to make sure that we don't just grab one thing and say, this is the magic thing. If you do this thing, everything's fine. And this thing over here you can do as well, but it's mutually exclusive. Optimal functioning is the blending of a whole bunch of things that are happening. And one of the very first domain that's come out of Ruben Rusk's work is the attention and awareness domain. And it encompasses everything that you can imagine is part of or influenced by both what we are aware of, how do we become aware of things, what are we aware of from a moment-to-moment perspective, or our awareness more globally in terms of what's happening in the world. So awareness at a very, very micro level, as well as at a more global level. And also attention, which is, what do we pay attention to? Okay. How good are our attention skills? Are we the person sitting in a meeting and can't concentrate because there's an annoying sounding air conditioner over our right shoulder, and we can't focus on the conversation because our attention is being pulled away by the annoying hum that the fan of the air conditioner is making. Why am I not able to put that away and remain focused and be present in the room?
Yeah,
and
okay.
all of those sorts of things.
Yep.
Now, I guess the key thing, and a bit of a theme which I think underpins a bit of a difference in mind insurance, is that we believe that well-being comes from building capacity of people learning how to have well-being. It's not about prevention, because we can't prevent trauma, we can't prevent difficulty, we can't prevent challenge. That's just the world we live in. Yeah. Stuff happens that doesn't work for us, and we've got to deal, right?
Bad shit happens, we can't do anything about that.
Yep, absolutely, right? We pursue a goal and we don't get it. We make a wrong decision and we end up with a disaster. Yep. All of those things are real. That's just part of the world that we live in. Yep. So it's not prevention and it's not cure. You're broken, you need to be fixed, all right? Well-being, if we really want a world where people flourish, is actually teaching people how to do it. Yep. So when we talk about awareness and attention, we're then saying what are the skills and capacities that we can help people cultivate that allow them to have awareness and attention in a way that enhances their well-being more than it detracts from their well-being. Yep. So that's, kind of in a bit of a nutshell, a sort of broad overview of what that looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's some of the science that I guess has been, not an introduction, but like as a led to this particular area of the domains?
So another interesting thing about the science of human flourishing isn't new, although the term positive psychology came around kind of late 90s. Yep. And that's just, a story we can go into at other times, but most people are familiar with. Actually, it'll be in our white paper. I'll cover it off really nicely in that, so when people get access to that, they'll be able to get a little bit of the history of positive psychology as a term. But William James, one of my most favourite, probably reasonably modern, but early 20s, 30s, positive psychology guru, if you like, one of the early heroes for me. He summed up beautifully, I think, this whole domain. If you pay attention to the annoying habits in others, you'll be surrounded by annoying people. Okay. And I just think that's fantastic because I can have a whole bunch of experiences happening in front of me, but my experience of that moment will be completely flavoured and determined by what I pay attention to. Mm-hmm. So that's the capacity. What capacity do I have to make some choices about or sustain my attention on those things that I choose to? So, if you and I we're going to be working together and you've got a particular trait or a habit that you have that's annoying, if I choose to pay attention to that, I'm going to see it everywhere, all the time, every day. Yep. And you're going to become the most annoying person on earth to me. Yep. It's going to stop us being at our best. It's going to stop us doing our best work. Now, that's not to say that I should just ignore it and you could do that thing that's annoying, but it's absolutely going to influence my experience of you unless I learn to think about and pay attention to and become aware of other attributes that you have and that you bring to the table. Okay. So very simple terms, that's really what we're talking about. Okay. And it's not simple. It's not if we were all good at it, we wouldn't find people as annoying as we do. If we were all good at it, we'd be able to pay attention in that meeting when there's that annoying noise that's happening over our... I laugh, like Kaz and I, in the dark, we're here in this beautiful space in Gippsland, it's so quiet. Yeah. And there'll be the frog making a noise from the pond, and I'm lying there going, oh my God, isn't that magnificent? Yeah. And Kaz is out of bed with a broom handle trying to smack the frog and make it shut up because it's stopping her from going off to sleep, and for me it's the most peaceful way to... Yeah. So that's capacity. That's not because I've got any, special wonderful powers. I just have the capacity to pay attention to that noise and to bring a different point of view to that particular experience. That's
really cool. Are there? I guess that there's certain things that people can do to try and to cultivate that, right? To cultivate that mindset, isn't it?
Yeah. So in terms of, there's some very practical things if we think about it. Let's take awareness to start with, right? My awareness is going to come from, in very practical terms, what papers do I read, what radio stations do I listen to, what news feeds do I have, and if you think about, it sort of always cracks me up when I think about ABC, and don't get me wrong, I love our ABC and our public broadcaster, but when you think about what runs on the BBC news feed, and when I look at that from time to time and I go, oh my God, there's so much stuff happening around the world that we just don't know about. which means my awareness is limited if that's, for example, all I choose to use to create my awareness. So in very, very practical terms, we can make some very simple, and these are quite simple choices, about changing our news feeds or looking at sources broader than the ones that we're potentially currently listening to. Okay, so that's really simple, all right, from an awareness perspective. Okay, from an attention perspective, though, we've got the science of mindfulness, which I know we're going to cover in heaps and heaps of detail. So mindfulness is cultivating the capacity of control over your mind.
Yep.
So you can choose to pay attention to certain things. You can also hold your attention on those things for as long as you like without getting distracted, without wondering what you're buying for dinner later, or your mind wandering off and thinking, you're trying to have a conversation with someone and your mind wanders off and it's your turn to speak and you realise you've kind of lost the thread.
I find I do that a little bit.
You're not, So those are the sorts of challenges we have in terms of paying attention. And those are some, very simple things that we find get in the way of us building really good relationships, is the fact that we've got someone who is getting frustrated with us because they actually know that we're not listening.
Yeah.
We're trying, and we might be present, as in I'm physically sitting here with you, but it's obvious to you that my mind has wandered and I'm off in, wherever else.
Yeah.
And potentially whatever you're trying to talk about is exceptionally important to you, and I'm not demonstrating, that it is important to you because my mind's wandered. Now, it might have absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I don't find it interesting or that I don't care about you or that you're not the most important person in the world in that moment. But if I don't have good attention skills... So positive relationships, parents and kids, teachers and kids, leaders and colleagues, all domains of life. Our ability to pay attention, our ability to be present. And by the way, it doesn't come from colouring books.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll leave that for another podcast.
That's really interesting. Do you think that in our current society, like thinking about, and when I'm talking about this, I'm thinking of our political landscape at the moment over the past 10 years in Australia.
Yep.
Do you think that there's a real lack at the moment of awareness in our politicians over the past 10 years, particularly from a high level, from a cabinet level or something like that?
Yeah, so you can look at awareness in two ways there. One is, I can't make a judgment about what are they aware of.
Yeah.
I can make an assumption based on their behaviour, and I can go, man, do they not know this? Are they not aware of that? So there's two things there. Am I aware but I'm choosing not to engage? All right, because I may have awareness about an issue, but I choose not to engage in that issue. Okay.
Yep.
What that then does, depending on my power that I've got or the influence I've got, is that I then start having influence over what you're aware of. Because if I've got the ability to channel what's put in front of you, then I can then start to influence your awareness.
Yeah.
And so if I'm aware of something but I don't share it, then someone else's awareness is now potentially influenced by that. So I think there's no question that I think that in some areas there's a lack of full awareness of the scope of particular issues, certainly from a policy perspective. There appears to be very narrow views or awareness around a particular issue. I mean, take something like the pill testing at the moment, which is, really quite prominent in the news, that people would have, from the music festival side of things. It's obvious when you just listen to the narrative of the different people that are participating, how much awareness they actually have of the scope of the issue.
Yeah.
Okay? And so that awareness then limits the possibilities that people see that may or may not be worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And that gets in the way of the debate, if you like, because we're potentially debating with someone who can't possibly engage with our idea because their scope of awareness of a particular issue doesn't even incorporate the point of view that we're potentially putting forward. Not to say that point of view is right or wrong. So it's a good example. Now, I don't have to be aware of everything, right? But what I do have to be able to do is build the capacity that enables me to expand my awareness in a really healthy way when's required. Rather than just go, no, I don't know about that, and not have the ability to go, is there something else at play here? What else could be at play? If I wanted to find that out, where would I go to find it? Who am I talking to? Am I, if I wanted to know more about climate change, am I only talking to one side of the argument? do I always only seek out people who are passionate about climate change? Because I think potentially the skeptics are a bunch of tossers, do I not bother asking their opinion?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the capacity that we build in people, is that ability to comfortably, when it is uncomfortable, go, well, actually, I'm not sure I really do want to go and talk to a drug user.
Yeah.
Because there's elements of that make me feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But if I really wanted to understand the scope of why people do what they do in an area that I just have no awareness of, maybe that's something that I need to do.
Yeah.
And if I influence policy, geez, that capacity is critical.
Yeah, definitely. That's just really interesting because, like, if I think about my Twitter feed, I use Twitter. I troll Twitter quite a lot.
Yep.
It's interesting. It seems like that is really prevalent, that people don't have that awareness at the moment. Like, their attention is just really focused on that kind of one opinion, like whether it's like climate change or pill testing. It's like one or the other. It's not really. People don't seem to be opening themselves up to like a broader array of like opinions, or the other side, or
Yeah. And I guess we take the approach when we fundamentally believe that optimal functioning is building capacity so that people can. It's about not making the assumption that everyone can be more aware about drug use. Well, some people can't, unless they're given the skills to be able to feel comfortable asking questions, know where to go and look for the answers. When they get the answers, and the answers are very unpalatable, how do they process those? And that's in the next domain that we'll talk about around comprehension and coping. And that's why the domains can't exist on their own, because as soon as I become aware of something, great, but now I need to comprehend it and make sense of it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to experience an emotion about it.
Yeah.
And it's going to potentially impact a relationship that I might have.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be some goals and habits around that particular issue that I'll find some touch points. So, that attention awareness is the first piece.
Yeah.
But then when we become aware, what do we do with that information?
Yeah.
And those are capacities, because for some people it can become very overwhelming. If I went and I didn't have all of the healthy capacities that I need, and I went and spent some time in, let's say, some rehab facilities, talking to people about their addiction issues, I could become so overwhelmed by those stories that I hear that it could actually be detrimental to me, without the capacity to be able to go, okay, well, I'm doing this from an awareness perspective. What sorts of things am I picking up? How am I going to use that information?
Yeah. Okay. It's really interesting. So, I guess, is there a way to I guess, measure how aware you are? Is there any kind of measurement at the moment?
There's not. No, what we have is there's a couple of really interesting things that assist us to know how motivated are we to become aware, if you like, right? So how curious we are. So curiosity is one of the things that helps us with awareness.
Yeah.
If I'm not curious, then I don't ask.
Yeah.
I'm not even curious about the fact that I don't know something.
Yeah, okay.
I've got to start somewhere, right? So curiosity is one of the things, if you like, then from an intervention perspective, right? Or we're building people's capacity to use curiosity. We know that people who have high levels of curiosity tend to have better outcomes. Okay.
Yep.
So it's a capacity that we certainly work with to cultivate. And there's a couple of little cool assessments that can say, well, for a start, how curious am I? So how motivated am I to find out new things? And then secondly, how, we call it embracing, how likely am I to embrace the new thing when I find out about it? Yeah. So, and again, there's two capacities. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, be more curious. Off you go. Well, what if you don't like what you see?
Yeah.
What if you don't like what you find? What if you just shut it out? You just go, oh, no, not going to accept that. Oh, found out something new, but I don't like it. It doesn't fit my worldview, therefore close the door on it. So there's this ability for us to, one, have a motivation to find out more, and then secondly, what capacity do we have to embrace that new information? And I'm not saying accept it, but at least play with it.
Yep.
Rather than just go, oh no, I don't like that, so let's stop there. So yes, we can work out, we can kind of get an indicator, if you like. It's certainly not an absolute, you are this curious versus that curious, but we can certainly, give an indication of, do I tend to be more curious, or do I tend to be less curious?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're the sorts of things that we help people cultivate.
So we'll talk about this in later podcasts,
Yep.
the strengths profile that we
Absolutely.
use, and that's the strengths tool that we use. And curiosity is one of the
It's
strengths.
one of the
It's
60
actually,
strengths.
one of my, I think it's one of my main realised strengths,
Yep.
actually. So if someone has that, let's say, as a weakness,
Yes.
curiosity, I guess how do you... not combat's the wrong word, but
absolutely.
how do you like...
So when we
Yeah.
look at it in the perspective of strengths, right? If curiosity is a strength, then we look at it as being something that somebody does well.
Mm-hmm.
They really enjoy it.
Yeah.
So they're really energized by it, and they're probably doing it all the time.
Yeah.
All right. So being curious and finding out more isn't a challenge. It's easy, right? Now, if someone has that as a weakness, what that means is they're not kind of naturally that good at finding out new stuff,
Yep.
going searching for it. They're also not that energized by it, so it's not something that really excites them. So if they had two options, go find some stuff out or watch an episode on Netflix, Netflix will probably win because, whereas you'd be happy to turn off Netflix and go do the research, right? So, but the distinction here is being curious is a task, is a thing. Curiosity is a strength.
Yeah.
So even if I have curiosity as a weakness, it doesn't stop me from being curious.
Okay.
But I would need to find other energizing, more motivating ways of being curious.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if it was to do with things that gave me a strong sense of meaning and purpose, or it enabled me to connect with people.
Yep. Okay.
Joining a group.
Yep.
Or those sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, building capacity for people is to understand what is likely to set them up to improve their ability to be more curious in a way that enhances their well-being.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Cool. So yeah, I've got this point here. So there's going to be an automatic default to my attention and awareness. What skills does somebody need to develop?
Yeah,
automatic default.
Yeah, absolutely. So defaults happen for a whole bunch of reasons, and this goes back to the conversation right at the start where we had, do we really understand what the brain does?
Yeah.
Kind of not really, not much at all. But we do know that part of the way the brain successfully keeps us safe every day is by creating lots of automation, lots of default positions, so that it doesn't waste time on stuff.
Yep.
Okay, which means that my awareness will become automated to a certain extent, because that means that my brain doesn't have to think about how I drive my car out of the driveway.
Yep.
Because it's already got that down pat. Okay. The risk there then is that I may not pick up something different in my driveway as quickly as I would if I was somewhere that wasn't as familiar.
Yep.
Right. So there's a downside
Yep.
to your brain being automatic, right? So those defaults happen over time. They happen because of our environment, because of our experiences. A whole bunch of things will influence our defaults. Some of it's biological, nature versus nurture, wherever you want to go with it. So part of us being able to combat that, if you like, is to be aware of those default things, right? A bit like before, if I said, like if you've got a habit that's annoying and I always pay attention to it, I'm probably going to be thinking about that annoying habit before I even get into the next meeting with you.
Yeah.
You're not even in the room yet.
Yeah.
And guess where my attention's going? My awareness is going towards that annoying thing that you do. You haven't even done it yet. You haven't even breathed that day yet. The meeting's like a week from Thursday. And guess what I'm thinking of? So when we create those habits and defaults, awareness around them is really important, so that we can then engage with those defaults and go, hang on a minute, that's not healthy.
Yeah.
Because by the time we get together in a week from Thursday, you will have been annoying before you got in the room. I'm already going to be on edge. I'm already going to be frustrated about something you haven't even done yet.
Yeah.
Okay. How then do I prepare for a week from Thursday? Thinking about different things, stopping those thoughts when they come up, thinking about the different elements that you bring to the table other than just that one annoying habit. What's the value of the meeting? What outcomes are we going to achieve? And then I can start to, if you like, retrain the default to something else. I'm not going to make... I might get rid of that default and hopefully replace it with a healthier default.
Yeah.
But the awareness around the fact that I do have some defaults in my attention that have become habits or have become part of my experience over time, catching those becoming aware of them, and then building the skills to be able to do something different each time that default pops up, until it becomes less of a default.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's something, it doesn't happen once. No. It's something we've got to work on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It takes time. Be patient.
Yeah, it's just you want to play for Wimbledon, you've got to do more than just hitting a giggle on every Tuesday lunchtime.
Yep. I've got a point here about introspection.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So introspection is a critical element of awareness, and introspection is about looking inwards as opposed to looking outwards.
Yep.
When we look outwards, the world sucks, everyone else sucks, it's everybody else's fault, it's, everything else that's out there that impacts me, okay? When I use introspection, I'm actually looking inwards towards, well, what am I doing? What do I believe? What do I think? How do I behave? What virtues do I live? What principles do I have? What beliefs do I operate under?
Yep.
So introspection's about looking inwards, okay? So awareness clearly needs a bit of both, right? If I'm only using introspection, I'm missing out on a whole bunch of other factors that are potentially influencing my experience.
Yep.
And if I'm only looking outwards, again, I'm missing out on a whole bunch of factors that are probably influencing my experience and my outcomes.
Yep.
So introspection is critically important. However, if we don't have good skills around introspection, then we can potentially not do it well, so that introspection, instead of enhancing our well-being, can become detrimental to our well-being.
Okay.
And so, for people who we often describe as perhaps having low self-esteem, if they don't build those capacities and improve in that space, then they can use introspection, but only to reinforce the poor beliefs that they are potentially holding about themselves in certain elements of their life. So once introspection kind of ticks over into that rumination space, where we're just circular, no end, no solution, we just keep going around and around without actually making any progress.
Downward spiral.
Absolutely. Then introspection can start, taking away from our well-being as opposed to enhancing our well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got people right from the spectrum of have no introspection or don't participate in introspection, so it's all external, okay? Right through, and that's not healthy, right through to the other end, which is all introspection, which is also not healthy.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is have a healthy amount of introspection, but also a healthy way of participating in introspection.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think we've covered off quite a lot there. Is there anything
else?
Fair bit. Yeah, just a little bit there.
Oh, look, there's so much. I could sit here and, we could just talk for hours and hours and hours. But obviously the mindfulness piece, the attention piece is very different. And, obviously the science of mindfulness we're going to cover off in lots of detail as well.
I think we've got about 3 parts scheduled for that one. So that one will be really interesting. Looking at both an Eastern and a Western mindfulness perspective, and what you like to call McMindfulness.
McMindfulness, yes, we'll introduce you to that.
Excellent.
Yep,
cool.
Sure.
All right, we might leave it there for that episode.
Great.
Thank you very much for joining us. As usual, if you can follow us or subscribe to us, you can subscribe to us on all the podcast platforms, on YouTube. Make sure you follow us on social media as well.
Great.
Happy flourishing.
Happy flourishing.